You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Under the Puppet is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who support the show over at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. Welcome to Under the Puppet, the show that talks to professional puppeteers about the art and business of puppetry with the sole purpose of helping you up your puppet game. My name is Grandpa Choco, and this is Under the Puppet. Welcome back to Under the Puppet. This episode, we have a bit of a different perspective on the world of puppetry as we interview Kirk Thatcher. Kirk started his career working on Return of the Jedi, and his other credits include E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Gremlins, and Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. He also worked very closely with Jim Henson and has become the go-to director for many of the recent Muppets and Jim Henson Company projects. Here now is my interview with Kirk Thatcher. Kirk Thatcher, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you, Grant. Oh, I thought it was Under the Puppy.
No, I'm sorry.
This was
it's a different.
I thought it was a dog appreciation thing.
That's my other podcast.
Ah, okay. So we're talking about, what is it?
Puppets. Puppets.
Oh, right.
Puppet.
Yeah.
Do you know a thing or two?
I didn't know that you knew I did that. That's weird. Not a lot of people know that about me.
Do you remember what it was that you first saw as a kid that made you want to choose this career path that you're in?
Oh, that's a good... Well, okay, Sesame Street was one. I loved the humor and I loved the puppets. It's specifically puppets. I think it's probably a combination of Sesame Street, King Kong, the original, and Ray Harryhausen movie, Jason and the Argonauts, which I saw on TV. Actually, I think all those things were on TV. My folks weren't really big moviegoers, so I didn't... I think the first movie that I saw in a theater that had this kind of stuff in it was probably Planet of the Apes. Mm-hmm. So that might have been the film I saw, but most of it was television or movies on television. And yeah, I said, I want to make creatures. I want to do movies. Two things I loved, comedy and creatures. And by creatures, I mean everything from Muppet puppets to monsters.
Right.
And aliens and everything. And then I was already on a career path to do creatures and makeup and special effects. And then Star Wars came out. And that sealed the deal. I was like, okay. But it's funny. I'm like, my best friend and I would make our own little Super 8 space movies and blow stuff up, and we wanted to be special effects guys. In fact, I was on the Disney lot earlier today and was telling the people I was meeting with, I said, I used to come here. They said, where'd you grow up? I said, I grew up in LA. I used to come to the Disney lot because my friend's dad knew Danny Lee, who was the head of the special effects department back when that was visual effects. Mm-hmm. The more practical is like building things and blowing them up, and he'd helped pioneer the squid for 20,000 Leagues. So I think... I'm bringing that up only to say it seemed like a career path you could have. I know I have friends who grew up in Pittsburgh and Milwaukee and Maine, and they're like, it just was a fantasy. Right. Like, you can't make a living doing that. Not here, not where I don't know anybody who does that. So growing up in LA, you knew people like, I know a guy who built the squid for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I know a guy, I knew Rick Baker. I met people who either did it. My next door neighbor, the family I grew up with, they were like my brothers. These three boys, their dad was a composer, and he had his own editing house for doing B movies and low budget features. So it was obviously a career path. So I think seeing those things and going, oh, there are people who actually do that for a living, made me go, okay, this is a career choice, not some crazy fantasy of I'm gonna, But obviously people who... I'm really impressed with people who choose it as a career path and live nowhere near...
Right.
It's less important to be near Hollywood now, but even then, people in Milwaukee who are making movies and, reading whatever they could out of Time magazine articles, trying to extract any data they could of how they made that.
Were your parents supportive of this kind of passion of yours?
I was very lucky. My mom was a school teacher, and... My dad thought I was a Martian. He was a lawyer. He had 3 law degrees. He was an incredibly smart, educated fellow. And just his one artistic thing was piano playing. He was a good piano player, but he played classical music. And I was a complete goofball. I just was running around doing voices and characters and acting out and drawing monsters. And I remember I used to get Famous Monsters magazine, which was a big influence for a lot of people. I read that Spielberg, when I was a kid, or Jaws came out, so I was still a kid, and Spielberg said, Famous Monsters influenced me. And I'm like, yeah, me too. It was kind of like this 20-year period where Famous Monsters affected a bunch of impressionable young boys, and girls, I guess. But my mom was really supportive of being creative and artistic. But when I left, I'd gone to UCLA for a year, just to fill in how supportive they were or were not. They were going to pay for me to go to any college I wanted to, and I was accepted to a bunch of them, a couple Ivy Leagues, and I didn't want to go. I wanted to work in the film business, so I went to UCLA for 2 semesters and then got called my friend up at ILM, Joe Johnston, and said, hey, I want to work on the new Star Wars movie. I'll make coffee. You'll sweep the floor, even if it's just the summer, like an internship. And long story short, I got the job and interviewed and got the job. And then my parents were like, you're going to throw away a college career to go play, literally this is a quote, to play with spaceships and rubber monsters. And I'm like, yes, I am. I am going to throw away, let me say that very clear, I'm going to throw away my college career, my college opportunity that you would pay for to go work with George Lucas and make rubber monsters and spaceships. Yes. And so they were, and I think, look, my dad grew up in the Depression. So to him, I remember when I was a kid, he said, all artists are bums. So to him, artists were people who sold paintings on the side of the road by the River Seine. He was in World War II. He saw these guys smoking Gitan cigarettes who looked like they'd had, 100 miles of hard road selling, paintings of the Eiffel Tower. And that's what he thought artists were. He didn't really get designers and all that. That was just very, very kind of conservative view of what arts were. And he said, artists were bums. So he was concerned, because it all came from love. He was just concerned that I wouldn't have a career. Like, you can't make a living making monsters. And so 10 years later, I was working with Jim Henson. In fact, I think Dinosaurs had gotten on the air, and, I worked all that with Jim. And my dad was like, I told you, and this is my father's sensibilities, I told you, a number of years ago that there was no career in monsters and you can't make a living. And I was wrong. It's a different world, and I didn't realize that would be a career path. So I apologize. I mean, that's how he was. He would apologize for something he said offhandedly 10, 12 years earlier. Mm-hmm. So at that point, they were really supportive and very proud. I think the Henson thing, I mean, Lucas was impressive to them. Star Wars, they got that it was big. They loved Star Trek and Leonard Nimoy, and then Jim Henson sealed the deal because he was just such a lovely guy, and he met them, and he was just Jim. He was like, oh, your son's very talented, and kind of like my mom's like, he sounds like Kermit. And I think at that point they were supportive. So they just didn't. Again, I'm grateful my mom was a teacher because she told me she taught Walt Disney's nephew. I don't know which one. I don't know if he ever went into the business, but he was really artistic. And she said, oh, you're like him. You just draw all the time. Like I was always drawing on my homework and all that. She goes, he was the same way. So she knew that wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't like I was on drugs or dilly-dallying or daydreaming. I was creative. So I got that kind of support from her. And then ultimately my dad was like, yep, you can make a career at it. That was what I bought a house. And he's like, oh, all right. That's, he was very much like that old school, like you need a job, you need a house. If you're going to get married and have children, you need to provide for your family. And,
right.
And so, yeah. So in some ways, yes and no.
When you were in high school and stuff, were you studying sort of artistic things?
Yeah, I actually I lived in the Valley and I went to Cal State Northridge for summer school. They had art classes. So I was taking art classes in the summer. And again, my mom being a teacher knew that path. Like, oh, let's sign you up for art classes. So I took art classes in the summer. My dad's secretary was a Sunday painter. She literally had a bunch of middle-aged ladies over to her house on Sunday in the garage after church, and they would paint. And so that was my training in oil painting and they were painting vases and boats, and I was painting like Obi-Wan Kenobi and skulls. and my dad's secretary was just this lovely, sweet lady, like literally a church lady. And she's like, well, that's interesting. But she would always take it as an art challenge. Like, all right, well, you want to paint the skull with cobwebs on it. You should lay in your darks and just attack it like here's a painting. It's it's not a vase of flowers, but you attack it the same way. So that was my funny art training in high school, and then I just was self-motivated, just self-taught.
When you got to ILM, you said, I'll sweep floors like a coffee. Is that what you were doing when you got there?
Well, okay. So along that path, besides taking oil painting classes, I was making molds and creatures. Not so much like Muppet-style puppets, but creature puppets, more like gremlins and goblins and things. And so I learned to sculpt with clay and make molds, plaster molds, and cast latex and urethane foam. And I'd made this creature for a friend's Super 8 movie in high school. It was like this big fat demon, sort of like a Jabba the Hutt, which was just head and shoulders with kind of this goblin-y face. And my friend's dad was an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. He was an eye doctor. And so he had glass eyes. And so he put glass eyes in it. And it was this big fat horned demon. And it was a scene where this guy goes to hell and this demon's like on the top of a podium. We shot it in my parents' garage with smoke machines. And so I learned to sculpt, cast, mold, and paint latex. And that's what got me the job, was I knew all the grunt work of making creatures. Because the reality was that when George built the facility up in Marin County, people didn't want to go move up there. They're like, I'm not going to move up for 2 years, 3 years, and like leave my family and leave Hollywood, where the bulk of the work is just to work for Lucas. And Lucas was notoriously not going to pay you a ton of money. I mean, he was not like, I'll make you rich. He's like, I'm not going to pay for that. So this Creature Shop was put together by Phil Tippett, who was obviously, like, you know, that was his game. And Chris Wallace, who left, he put together the Creature Shop. Phil was finishing up Dragon Slayer, and Chris was going to run it with Phil. And then Chris went off to start his own shop. And so half of the people on the Creature crew, let's say 10 people, like half of them were not creature makers. I was one of the few people, even though I was self-taught in high school, who had actually sculpted, mold, cast, painted, like done the whole process. Mm-hmm. And back then, there weren't enough jobs that most people, you know, the Rick Bakers and Dick Smiths did everything. Like you sculpted, mold, cast. There were a few specialists, but nobody was a creature designer. Nobody was a mold maker for creature shops. You know, you kind of had to do everything. It was only then, really starting in the 80s with the birth of, Jedi and then Boss Films with Ghostbusters, people started getting, we're going to have a full-time, what they called the rubber room or the creature shop. And you'd had a full-time mold maker because it was a specific skill, or full-time guys who ran the foam latex. And then it became more of a, I wouldn't say a factory job, but a specialist, filled with specialists. But back when I was learning, and you know, Ray Harryhausen would sculpt, draw, design, sculpt, paint, you know, on the foam, paint and animate. Like, you did everything. So that was kind of the role model. Like, that was what's cool about it. As an artist, you got to do everything. It wasn't like I make molds or I paint things. I mean, I have friends now who just paint textures digitally. They don't even paint. They're just there on a Cintiq, you know, fiddling around in Photoshop all day. So I was kind of glad I got out when it started getting super specialized and moved more into writing and directing and writing at the time and designing. But yeah, so I didn't, to answer a very long answer to a very simple question, I did not sweep floors. I mean, I did sweep floors. Actually, my first week, I painted the walls. And I was terrified of heights, and it was in a warehouse with 22-foot ceilings, and I was on a scissor lift just by myself with an airless sprayer, and I remember putting this thing up, and it was a scaffolding, and, you know, my head's bumping the ceiling so I can paint the ceiling, and I was the first day I was shaking so much, the whole thing was like, rattle, 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 rattle. I'm like, I'm not going to say anything, and I painted the whole inside of that building by myself.
Just happy to be here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then started with mocking up maquettes and setting up the shop, and then sculpting, molding, casting, painting, everything on that job. It was great. It was a great first job.
Yeah. I read an article that just came out recently, actually, about your work on Star Trek IV, and you were hired as sort of a special effects consultant for Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, his assistant, because
Yeah. And because he was directing the film. And the thing that stuck out to me was the story about how you sort of lobbied to get the part of the punk on the bus. Could you tell us that story?
Yes. Leonard was it's funny, as I've aged, I realize I can kind of drop into Leonard's voice now. Kirko.
That's what he'd call me. I'd call him Chief. Hey, Chief.
Kirko, sit down.
So I'd already been working with him. I got the job like in February, and we were already probably in the fall because we shot the next spring. So I came on in the second draft of the script. So the script was being written, and there was this scene with the punk on the bus. And I had been in bands in high school, and I'd had some version of a bright orange mohawk at some point. And I felt good enough around him. Like, we were friends. It wasn't like he was the boss. I mean, he was the boss, but he's also like my friend, like an uncle, I would say. And so I asked him, I said, hey, you know that part of the punk on the bus? I'd like to play that. And he looks at me.
Really?
I'm like, yeah. I was in a punk, you know, I basically said what I said to you. I was in a punk band, or a band, we did punk songs, and I've had an orange mohawk or a version of one, and I'll do you a drawing of what I would look like. He's like,
all right, let me think about it.
I'm like, okay, so don't say, you know, I was like, all right, I'm not going to pester him. So I didn't bring it up. I gave him the drawing a couple days ago. I did a sketch, which I still have, actually. I should auction that off someday. Of me as the punk, you know, kind of like what I would, it's actually pretty close to what I ended up looking like. I think I drew myself a little thinner. And showed him the drawing. He's like, all right, you do this to your hair. I'm like, yeah, do a mohawk. He's like, all right. So that was it. Like, a week went by, maybe a week, like, you know, it was like, say that was a Monday or Tuesday. It was like the following Wednesday. We've had, you know, we're working on the pre-production of the movie, and I'm leaving his office at the end of the day. It's like 5:00, and I'm walking out. He's like, one more thing. I'm like, yeah, you can do it. I was like, wait, seriously? He's like, yeah. I'm curious to see what you do. So I ran out and I'd already had a bright orange mohawk. I just had about as long as your hair is, about an inch and a half, 2 inch, short sides, spiky top, kind of more like a Billy Idol. So I went to my friend. I did the hair myself. I put together the wardrobe. The only thing they supplied me with were these shoes. They were leopard print high tops. Chucks. What are they?
Chuck Taylor.
Taylor. Yeah, Converse high tops, but with like a leopard skin print on it. So I went I went in with makeup. Had them do the makeup and kind of talked them through like a heavy eyeliner. We all kind of knew what punks looked like at that time. They'd been very much in the news. And the funny part was, so I'm all decked out. This is like probably a month before shooting, just to see what I was going to look like in my full outfit and the hair, and maybe 2 weeks before shooting, because we hadn't been on location. This was still on the lot at Paramount. And I walked out of the makeup trailer, and DeForest Kelley was going in for his makeup test, and he sees me and his kind of southern drawl. He looks me up and down, and he goes, "Hey, Kirk, nice shoes." Very slow take, and I just cracked up. I was like, "Thanks, D." So yeah, that was great, and that was that whole. I said it's going to be on my tombstone. I'll win the Nobel Peace Prize and be like, he was the punk on the bus.
Yeah.
I just had a meeting day at Disney and 2 writers I'd never met, and they talked about for like 10 minutes. Like, "You're the punk. Oh my God, what's up?" We could talk all day about that. And then just loved Star Trek 4, which was fun because it was the most successful of the original series movies by a factor of like double. I think, well, I don't know. 1 did okay. I think 1 did like 100 million. I mean, don't quote me on these. People are going to be on Google going, "He's wrong." You know what I say to you, nerd, with Google that I don't have in front of me. But Trek 4 doubled like 3. Even 2, like, 2 and 3 did like 60, 80, 80, 60, something like that. And I think Trek 4 did like 140, 150, it like doubled the amount. So it was just hugely popular. And I think it was because of the humor. And I was a little bit of that. Actually, another thing, my cameo in that, because everyone's like, "Oh, you got the SAG card," because I got a SAG card from the punk. And I'm like, no, that's actually considered a featured extra. I got it because in the beginning, I got it because of the song, because I sing the song that I'm rocking out to. And in the beginning of the movie, there's Spock doing the questions. And it's like, "Who said logic is the span of our civilizations and agrees as a guide?" Correct. That was me. And I did that because this is the kind of odd jobs I had. I was like, we need a bunch of science questions and philosophy questions that Spock's just fielding really fast. So, go write those. You like that kind of stuff. So I came up with like 20 questions. And Leonard's like, well, and I think the sound guy's like, we need something for him to work to. So he can, Leonard's like a real actor. He can't just be like, correct, or just answer. So I gave him the questions and answers, and then I read them, and we sped it up a little bit so he could, be moving the computer panel and answer the questions. So that was why I got the SAG card, was for the reading of, and it was supposed to be a scratch track. But Leonard's like, "Nah, it's fine. You don't need to pay somebody to do that." I'm like, "Thanks, man."
A lot of times that happens. A lot of times the scratch track becomes the...
it happens in animation. Joe Raft, who was an amazing story guy up at Pixar, was a good friend. Sadly, he's passed away many years ago, but he was doing the scratch track, which often in animation, for Olaf. I mean, Olaf, for the caterpillar in the other German name.
I know. All I'm thinking is Choo Choo Train, because that's the ride.
Right.
Heimlich.
So he did the scratch track, and everyone's like, "We're just, my stunt cast, you're great." So yeah. And I think there's another character recently that was, I think it was in Disney movie about the stunt dog.
In Bolt?
Bolt, yes. Yeah. The hamster, I think, was one of the story guys. And the same thing. He did the scratch crack, and he just became the character. So
yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about the story about becoming the punk, because, and you mentioned that you were friends with Leonard Nimoy, but
not at that point. I was friendly with him,
right? Yeah. But would you recommend a performer to do that kind of thing if they really think that they're right for the part?
It doesn't hurt. I mean, he wasn't going to fire me because I asked. I mean, right. I didn't. It wasn't an ultimatum, and I didn't pester him. I mean, right. I didn't want to be the guy's like, "So, am I going to do it? Can I do it?" Because I know I hate those guys. It's like, hey, I'll answer you when I know the answer.
Right.
I don't hate them, but it's always, you don't want to be the pest. So this whole business, the history of this business is people putting it out there. Here's the thing I learned, because my parents raised me to be very shy, as you can tell, and not proud and not boastful. And you realize you just get walked over in this industry. I mean, I always thought, like most people that I respect, it's like you let your work speak for itself. Like if you're good, people go, "Oh, it's good." You don't walk around telling everybody how great you are. But I have found that the people who walk around telling everybody how great they are, they have to have the talent. But then if they tell everyone they're great, or say, hey, check this out, or hey, I can do this, that's how you find out. If you're nice and quiet and shy and sit in the back of the room and you're really talented, but nobody knows, unless you're like showing your movie to somebody, and even that takes some chutzpah.
Right.
If you are confident in your abilities, whatever it is, puppeteer, actor, singer, dancer, go for it. And 90% of the time you're going to get shut down. So you develop a thick skin. That's the other thing you need in this industry is a thick skin. You can audition for something and nail it and know you nailed it. And even the people go, you nailed it. And then some other person gets it because they're a famous, in voiceover particularly. You can do a great job. I'm like, that's hilarious. You brought all this stuff. No, but we're going to go with Josh Gad or, Brad Pitt or whatever.
Right.
And there might not even be a great read, but they're famous. So I'd say go for it. Yeah. I mean, don't embarrass yourself, but like let's say it didn't happen. I'd say, well, hey, I tried.
Right.
I asked Cindy Crawford out when she was the guest star on the Muppets because I thought I'm not going to be able to live with myself if I didn't go ask her out. And that's a whole story in itself.
Well, we'll get to Muppets today.
That'll be that story.
Well, how did you start working for Jim Henson? How did that come about?
So I'd done Star Trek 4, and because of all the effects stuff, I'd met a woman whose name's BJ Rack. And she was a producer, like rainmaker for a company called Omnibus Able, which was a big combination of two effects companies that had joined in the mid-'80s. And she and I became friends because she was pitching them to do work on Star Trek, and it just didn't work out. We had to deal with ILM. But she was funny, and we hit it off, and we became friends. Well, she told me that her ex-husband, the father of two children, was the guy, Jim Frawley, the guy who directed the first Muppet movie. And I said, oh, that's cool. I said, I like the Muppets. She goes, would you like to meet Jim Henson? I said, I would love to meet Jim Henson. She goes, well, I think you guys would get along. I developed a couple shows with creatures and puppets in them to pitch as movie or TV series ideas at that point, because that was my background. And so she saw that. She said, you should show this to Jim Henson. He would like this. I'm like, okay. So she brokered the deal and set it up. I met him. He was in LA for meetings, whatever, and he was at the Bel Air Hotel. So I went and had lunch with him and his assistant. And we had lunch, and then we went into his room and sat on the floor, and I showed him a bunch of drawings and pictures of sculptures, and I think I brought a sculpture or two, and we just talked about everything. The thing that impressed me, I mean, obviously I was impressed with Jim Henson, but what impressed me about him as a man, as a person, was he asked me what I thought of Labyrinth that had just come out, like 6 months earlier. I have to look at it. It was like, came out in 87, so this was like summer of 87, something like that. And I said, well, I said it was hard to care about the kid. I never thought he was in danger because David Bowie would sing and dance. The goblins were funny more than scary. And I said, so, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was gorgeous. And he's like, yeah, we'd done Dark Crystal. We had our own language and it was way out there. And I wanted to bring it. He wanted to bring it more to make it relatable. And so we had, Jen Connolly and the baby and the threat for the baby being lost forever into Goblin Land. But still it was more an art piece than a successful film. I mean, it's not my opinion. That's the opinion of the general public. So I was just impressed that he would ask. I was 24 years old. I was 86, 87. So yeah, I was like 24, 25. And he asked my opinion, and he really listened. He wasn't like, oh, what'd you think of it? Expecting oh, it's great. And I said, well, I did this and this, like an artist to an artist. And I was kind of blown away. More after fact. I just answered him. I'm not too self-aware. So, I mean, I knew who he was, but I figured we were talking he talked to you as an equal, not as what do you think of my work? I'm impressed, aren't I?
Right.
I'm impressive. He was like, what did you think? I like your artwork. What do you think of my artwork? And it was only in retrospect, I was like, Jesus, this guy's asking, at the moment I was like, oh, well, I answered him as honestly as I could. And I was like later, jeepers creepers. I should have just been, oh, it's amazing, but he made you feel comfortable enough to be honest. And I think any real artist has to deal with that kind of honesty, whether you're an actor or a painter or a sculptor or a writer. You have to have your own truth about what you're trying to do, and maybe it was wrong. Maybe it's too weird. I mean, whatever it is, whatever you're endeavoring to do, if you want a real response, besides the obvious one, is no one went and saw your movie. And he was curious as to why, I think. What do you think? You're an artist, these stuff I like. I mean, because he told me as much. What did you think of it? And so we talked. And that was kind of the beginning of our working relationship and our friendship. Is I never felt like I had to be nice or say, oh, that's great, Jim. And I think most of the people he worked with, he didn't surround himself with yes men or yes women. He surrounded himself with artists who like to collaborate. And for him, it was always a collaboration. Even in that early meeting, it was just, what's your idea? What's your idea about my ideas? And that was kind of amazing and pretty rare, especially for someone. I mean, that was the peak of his career. I mean, the Muppets had been a huge hit. Fraggle Rock was just finishing, and Labyrinth had just come out within the year. So, he was riding high.
Yeah.
And the fact that he would ask, it's like me asking a barista at Starbucks, what'd you think of my last TV series? I don't know if I'd do that. I mean, I guess if he'd shown me a script and I was like, oh, you're a good writer, what'd you think? But it was just, I don't know. That's kind of shows the character of the man. There's just such a unencumbered by his own success, and really just a true artist dealing with the joy of creating and the fun of playing and neat ideas.
Yeah, well, that kind of answers my next question I was going to ask, but maybe you have something to add to it. What lessons did you learn about the creative process by working with Jim?
Oh, geez. Well, I think part of it was, if you're not having fun on set, then something's wrong. If you're doing a comedy, you don't take it too seriously. Don't forget the joy. Work with people. Don't have them work for you. I mean, if you're having a guy lay a brick wall for you, I still go talk to him as a fellow creator and say, hey, what do you... And that's how he did. He just approached everyone as equals. Like, I like what you do. I will pay you to do that. Let's come up with a neat way to do it together. So I've always tried to approach at least work like that. Is like, nobody works, when you're a director, people don't work for you. They're working with you. You're all trying to achieve, hopefully, a similar goal. And if not, find out why. If you've got a cameraman who keeps shooting weird stuff, you'd be like, why are you doing that? Not like you're an idiot, do what I say. I mean, that's my technique. I mean, Jim Cameron's very successful, and he tells everybody their job, and that's, other people are very much like, do it this way, do it my way. Jim was like, let's do something neat, and it was that sense of play, and play not like, haha, we're laughing ourselves to sleep every night, but more that collaboration and that kind of joy of creating together. I think I got spoiled because, that doesn't happen very often. So I try to bring that at least, onto set and stuff. And the other half of the job is trying to do it on time and on budget, which, because I'm not Jim Henson and I'm not bankrolling it, or I'm not the 800-pound girl in the room, I can't just be like, well, let's do it the right way. It's like, okay, well, that'll work because it has to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, and just treating people that you work with respect, and, trying to get in their shoes, understand what they're trying to do. Because nobody, at least on the Muppets, is trying to, sabotage the thing. You might think, why does this person not want to do this? Like, we're not understanding each other. It's typically what it is. And look, tempers get short, and sometimes you're just frustrated or you're tired because you've been working 14, 18-hour days. But, not jump into anger or control. Don't try and control it. I guess that's it. He Jerry Nelson, in his epitaph or eulogy for Jim, I guess it was eulogy that he did as Floyd, he said something about flippered leader, whim of steel. And I was like, oh, that's so exactly Jim. He just, seemed like a neat idea. The neat idea we're going to do. and if you're allied with it, it just seemed like, oh, we're going to go play over here. If you wanted to do something else, he would very probably. I never was that guy, but there were people who wanted to do another thing, and he was like, "No, I don't want to do that," and that was it. And if you didn't want to do it, then, or you wanted to do it, then you're like, "Okay, well, you go do that, and we won't do it together." So it wasn't vindictive. It wasn't like, screw you, you're not doing it my way. It was more like, this is what I want to do. Come join me. Come play along. It was like, I'm going to be the piper, and you join in the chorus. You join in with the band. Yeah, and you play along, and I like you, and I hire you because you're a great tuba player. You're not writing the score, or maybe you'll take a solo, or you can do whatever you want. It was that kind of collaboration, not you are this guy and you do this. You play these notes and play them exactly the way I wrote them.
Right.
So and to me, that's why I like going to work, because it's tons of preparation and then exploration. Oh, it sounds like I'd be teaching a class. Preparation and then exploration. But no one wants to come to work and just read the lines, jerk. Read the lines and maybe be funny.
Right.
Again, I'm talking as a director. No one wants to go as an actor and say, someone just tell you, read the lines. I like to say it in that funny voice you do. You're a performer. I don't know how often you work where you're not doing your own thing, but the fun of going to work with someone who's collaborative, at least for me, is that you try and make something together. So
Yeah, you can add little things.
I'm sure you've talked to people I worked with, like, that guy's no, it's not him at all. He says, show it up, walk in that door, say your line. I'm covering it from this angle.
Well, speaking of work on the show Dinosaurs, you did just about everything. You were designer, co-producer, writer, even performer. Do you enjoy playing so many roles in a production?
Yes, yeah. I was saying that's, as an artist, what I love. I think I have ADHD or something where I can't focus on one thing for too long. I have a weird, I don't know whether, I'm sure it's some sort of pathology, but I like to get completely immersed in something and then go get completely immersed in another thing. And to me, that's the joy of it's never boring. It's a plate spinning thing. And yes, I love that. I never feel stretched too thin. I just want to do it all and do it and have fun and make stuff, you know. I think, yeah, I mean, Star Trek, I got to do tons of things. I got, write a song, play a part, write parts of the script, design creatures and aliens, work with the special effects. Leonard gave me all this responsibility and, accountability. And then the same thing with Jim. It was like, except actually Jim passed away before I got to do any writing or anything. With Jim, I was the idea guy and a designer. Mm-hmm. We would just sit around and come up with ideas again. It was like the best job in the world. Sit with Jim Henson and go, it'd be neat, blah, 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 blah. And I go, oh yeah, that'd be fun. All right, let me go do that. And I go draw some stuff, and 2 days later come back and goes, oh, I like that. Well, that would not be a good puppet. That's a neat drawing, but it's not be a good puppet. And, it was just kind of like, cool. We just make shit up. It's like playing, but getting paid for it. So yeah, the long answer again. I don't do short answers, obviously.
No, that's fine. Well,
you get paid by the minute, right? The podcast yes. This will be you'll make tons of money.
Well, you wrote for Muppet Treasure Island and Muppets Tonight.
Yes.
And how do you approach writing such established characters? I mean, can you add your own voice to them, even though they're these characters?
You can't add your voice. You can add your spin. And I talked a lot about this with Jerry Jewell, who was my Muppet tutor mentor, about writing for the characters. Because you come at it with, and I see this now with the writers that are coming on and the directors that come on for the new Muppet stuff. It's like, just had this conversation this morning. The Muppets are inside out. To do it correctly, it has to come from the center and go out. It can't be. They're not a franchise like Mickey Mouse, where you could do a Mickey Mouse, I could do a Mickey Mouse, draw them, animate, and write a story, and nobody's going to go, that's not a Mickey Mouse, because it's pretty generic at this point. The Muppets have a tone that comes from within that's, very much... It was that Jim, Frank, Dave. It was the original five guys, and Jerry Jewell's kind of sense of gentle whimsy is what I called it. And I think Jerry taught me their voices the way he heard them. And then, when I helped create Clifford and Pepe, and working with Bill and Kevin Clash and Brian Henson with, when he was doing Sal and Johnny... you work with the performers you hear them making up this character, and then you kind of grab that and run with it. I can talk and write like Pepe or Bobo, or I hear those voices in my head. So I'd watch the Muppet Show, but I wasn't some giant fan, so it wasn't like, oh, Kermit wouldn't say that. So Jerry, by example, he never said, here are the rules, but just kind of by osmosis, working with him on Muppet Treasure Island and seeing him work on other projects before, like Christmas Carol. Kind of absorbed their characters. And I remember the last script I worked on was Muppets in Space, and it was basically Galaxy Quest, but with the Muppets. And Disney was going to do it. They'd done Treasure Island, and they were going to pick it as their second script. But then the Muppets went to the Sony deal, and so they did. Jerry had written a script called Star Gonzos. And they took it and rewrote it with a bunch of writers. And Jerry just kind of washed his hands of it because he didn't have any control. It was very frustrating for him. But it was hard, actually, to see that. But he'd written me a very lovely note. He read my Muppets from Space, third draft. And he said, this is a great script, but you need to focus on the heart of Kermit and Fozzie. He goes, you need to... he goes, it's really funny, and you've got the characters' voices, but you need to focus on the friendship, kind of the heart between Fozzie and Kermit, who are kind of the two main. Kermit was mistakenly the leader. Again, it was Galaxy Quest. Kermit was mistaken the leader of an alien race, and it was basically he was just alien Jesus. They'd been waiting for his return for millennia, and he came back because he was green like a little alien, and it was a whole farce on how he got there. So it was kind of like Man Who Would Be King. There suddenly he's worshiping Fozzie's his sidekick, and so he's my And so they end up at one point they're thrown in prison with some aliens are going to eat them, and they become friends. And anyway, it was this long, funny story, but all took place in space, and it was about 200 years in the future. I remember it starts in San Diego. It was the entire west coast of California became one city, just all the traffic jams. But he wrote me this lovely note, which I have somewhere, just saying, this is really funny. It's a great Muppet movie, which was really sweet of him because he'd written his movie, which was the complete opposite. It was very small. If you took the idea of Muppets from space at its core, which is the Muppets live in a house and Gonzo thinks he's an alien, and it was much smaller. It was like there was a group of like alien conspiracy theorists who found him and said he was the foretold Gonzo was an alien, and he didn't think he was an alien, but they knew he was an alien. And so in the end, I don't even remember his original script, but I think it was open-ended whether or not he was an alien or not. But in the end was he realized, and they said, "You're one of us. You're a family." And it was Gonzo going through a crisis of conscience. Like, what am I? Not who am I? What am I? And it had that heart. So I took it to heart, and then they didn't do it, and they did his movie. But the sad part was they took his movie and just kind of blew it out and took all the heart out of it and made it kind of I don't know. For me, it's my least favorite Muppet movie, only because it doesn't really have a center. There's great stuff in it. I got to rewrite. I did some punch-up on it and wrote some Pepe stuff and Bobo stuff. And, Jeffrey Tambor and Bobo is hilarious, but it just kind of meanders. Mm-hmm. Not that Muppet movies need to be hard-hitting stories, but and the process on it was very much, they were rewriting it. I wrote on it for a couple weeks, and I started doing second unit directing. And it was just rewriting every day and then handing in the new. So it kind of didn't know what it was until it was in the editing room. So I think that's why I probably have more of an insider's distaste for it. It was like, it's just a bad process. Like, you don't want to waste that much time. I mean, it wasn't terrible to work on. It was just like messy, I guess, is what you'd say. Mm-hmm. So, that's pretty common these days. You hear like handing in the pages while they're shooting.
Right. Well, recently you've directed puppet projects for the internet, like the Muppets Bohemian Rhapsody and Neil's Puppet Dreams for the Jim Henson Company.
Yes.
How are these new media projects different from film and
no
television?
Budget, no schedule. Like it's,
Right.
shoot 18 pages in a day. We shot all the Neil's in 3 days, 2.5 days, and half a day was at his house, and the rest was on. I remember I shot the 2 rock video ones, the one with the Neil's Puppet Dreams, the Tropical Dream, where it's all drag queens and puppets, and it's like and then Joe Manganiello surfs in. We shot that in half a day, and then we shot the Bollywood cow one in the other half of a day. So it was like 2 giant rock videos with all these blue screen, green screen, a cast of hundreds in one day. And then we shot like on Friday afternoon, we went to Neil's house and shot 2 of them, or at least the 2 segments at his house, and then like wraparounds in their bed. That was the actual bed in their bedroom. And then we shot, I think, 3 on Saturday and those 2 on Sunday. So it was crazy. I think that's the biggest thing is your budget and schedule are just nil. They're non-union, so very often they're 14. I mean, sometimes union jobs are 14-hour days, but okay, that sounds like it's all bad. The good part is you can kind of, if you've seen Neil's puppetry, you can do whatever you want. I mean, there's no FCC. There's no, you can say, do, think, Neil's having simulated sex with an Indian cow, which was funny, at least in my book. We checked it with people who were Hindu and saying, is this offensive? And like, no, it's funny. We get it. Like, we didn't get, there's no Hindu Office of Culture, but we didn't want to offend anybody. We just, thought it would be like, what's the most inappropriate thing? Okay, well, he's dreaming of being in love with a cow, which if he was Indian, I guess would be, I don't know. We didn't ask that question. But we did a Bollywood number. So I think that's the fun of it, like Bohemian Rhapsody. You get to do this crazy stuff that it's like making short films. I mean, it isn't like it. It is making short films that you just never got to do, unless you were doing an opening for a movie like the Pixar shorts. There's no market for it. So what's nice is with Neil's and the Muppets is that people are paying, whoever it is, the sponsors are paying for these just fun little bone mows of little jewel boxes of entertainment. So they're fun because you get to do crazy stuff like that. I think that's the upside. They don't have to be heavy stories. It can be a gag, literally. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody is just essentially a parody video, but with the crazy Muppets on it.
Well, it's also fun, I think, too, when like Bohemian Rhapsody, it gets shared all over the world.
Well, it's like up to like 60 million views now or something. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's great, but that's not part of my process. My process is let's do something fun, and maybe it'll. I mean, we've done other ones. Like one of my favorites is Stand By Me, where it's Big Mean Carl eating a bunch of bunnies,
right.
clubbing him with a carrot, and I mean that was my idea, and I think it's hilarious. And I think 200,000 people watched it. I don't know, but to me that's classic Muppets, just dumb.
Right.
When you look at the Sullivan stuff. Big Mean Carl has like 10% more personality than the phenomena. Just the tension between this giant bunny-eating monster and these little bunnies who are just super sweet. I don't know, just makes me laugh.
Yeah. Well, and talk about doing fun things is you did some commercials with the Muppets where they were driving cars, but going through drive-thrus and interacting with people. Yeah. Do you like trying to, kind of, I don't know if you came up with that idea, but like doing these complex puppetry things?
I don't mind. I like the complexity of it. What the nightmare was, people were just, it's LA. So everyone's kind of like, oh yeah, hey. It was so funny. We were like, oh, we're going to blow their minds. And people, we'd preset with the managers of these fast food places or gas stations. Like, we're going to come up with the Muppets. And they're like, yeah, okay, we're going to do it around this time. Okay, but don't tell your staff. We won't. So we drive up and it's like, hi, I'd like to order. And the people would go, oh, hey. Look. They're like, oh my God, it's coming. Nope. Right. Just like, oh, hey. Yeah, I'd like a French fry. And they're like, okay, what do you want now? French fries? And do you have grasshoppers? No. Okay, then just a French fry. What do you want, Bobo or Fozzie or whatever? And people were just so not wowed. And we're like, we should have done this in like Kansas, somewhere where the Muppets meet. It's LA, or we're in Burbank. Like I'm sure Johnny Depp shows up and asks for burgers.
Right.
So that was the hard part. The fun part is figuring out the tech. I love that. I mean, that's another thing I got from Jim is I like figuring out how to do the magic trick. How do you put two puppets in a car where from the outside and even looking in from a drive-in window, you can't. It looks like Kermit's driving the car. Where do you hide the driver? And then we rigged a whole car. I mean, it's they do it in movies. So
right.
But it was fun to do. And it was Toyota commercial. I forget which Toyota it was. Anyway, it was fun. But yeah, I love the challenge of, how do you make them ride a bike?
Right.
Nowadays, you can skin the. I mean, the hard part's doing it realistically. Now it's just put it in front of the green screen. We'll figure it out later.
Right. Well, that's another question I was going to ask you is, recently in a lot of productions, and I'm talking a lot of Star Wars stuff, the recent Star Wars films, they've been using computer graphics and creatures.
Coming back to real.
They're coming back to real. Is that a great thing?
I think so. What's funny is Neil Scanlon, who runs all the, you specifically mentioned Star Wars, he was one of the main guys at the Henson Creature Shop. So he hires a lot of the old Henson Creature Shop guys from London to do all that. They're all done out of London. I love it. I mean, I just think it looks better. I don't know if people have seen the Solo movie, but the kind of the boss woman, I've forgotten what her name is, but she's sort of like a Cruella de Vil alien in the beginning, who rises out of the water, and that's practical. It might have been, goosed with CG, but it was great. It was there.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think, to me, it's a tool for the job, and I think if you're interacting with it, or if it's got to work in the real world, why do a big furry? I think one of my favorite, it was the first time they really blended it well, examples is Where the Wild Things Are. They had guys in big 10-foot fur suits walking around, but the faces were done because there's just no way the mechanics can move that fast at that scale. Where they're moving, their lips are moving, their eyes are blinking. It's going to look really... And then also the audio, you're just going to get... And, get in the interaction with little kids. So they just put a face there with a hole where the mouth was, and the actors... So he would act to the actor, the suit performer. And then they would animate it later, but you got the fur and the wind and everything and actually even what the skin looked like in that environment. So I think that's probably the best way to do that, unless you're doing a Smog, the dragon. There's no way you're going to make a 12-foot mouth. I mean, maybe they did, but most of that's just going to be for the actors to look at something, and maybe for color lighting reference. So yeah, I love it. I think. All CG usually is a bad idea, and sometimes all rubber is a bad idea too.
Right.
Just because it's limited by physics.
Well, I thought it was. This is spoiler alert to anyone, but you should have seen it by now. But in Last Jedi, when Yoda appeared, it was like you could feel it in the theater. Like this is wait. First of all, it's Yoda, but that it was a real.
It was a real Yoda.
Real Yoda, as opposed to all the prequel stuff that was all the CGs.
Yeah. It was fun because he was goofy too. He was like
Yeah.
goofy Yoda. He even looked a little goofy, but I guess he's been dead for a while, so he's like he's kind of jolly. But yeah, you could immediately tell, and people got a kick out of it.
Yeah.
I wish they'd done that with Carrie Fisher. Just hire, put makeup on someone, find someone who looked like Carrie, and just loop her or something. But because that CG face was just Jesus at the end, giving something away. But when you see Leia and she has hope, you're like, oh fuck. It looks like something out of Final Fantasy, Like,
right.
And it was so close. They talk about the uncanny valley. I don't know what they could have done differently, and I know they killed themselves to make it like that, but it just, I don't know. It's hard. It's definitely a tricky. I mean, bringing back the dead for an on-camera match on something that's an iconic face like that's tough.
Yeah. When you are casting for a production, what attributes do you look for in the puppeteers that you cast?
Well, typically we're already at the level where we know they can puppeteer. We don't usually try people we've never met or people I haven't worked with or something. So for me, usually it's what they bring to the character. And, everyone has different skill levels. It's like some musicians might vamp better, but they're kind of a little loose with following the score, you know what I mean? And others might follow the score perfectly, like, that's amazing. But you throw a curveball and I'm like, oh, do a solo. And they're like, I don't know what to do. So I think it depends on the role. It's weird with the Muppets because they're already cast, really. I mean, they spend sometimes years figuring out who's going to play who. So we don't do a lot of casting for Muppets. The show I just did with Netflix, again, it's sort of like studio musicians in Atlanta. Like, there's 8 guys who are rhythm guitarists who will rock this out. This guy is going to bring a little more zazz, and this guy's going to be just like super tight, and this guy's going to be loose but bring something to it that you can't put down in words. It's the same thing. Like, we cast this Netflix show and there was 3 characters and one was a walk around, so I know 2 or 3 guys who did that, and then there's one character we knew exactly who it was kind of written for, and so we just brought her in and I'm not mentioning names because the show's not known and I don't want to, but anyway, I guess when it's out people will figure it out. But we kind of wrote this character for this one performer because it was her sensibility. Mm-hmm. And then for this last character, we, again, 2 or 3 people and just read and you kind of an idea. And it's like casting for anything, really. Because again, they're all, skill level is all a level talent. It's like, how are they at improv? How are they at just getting that voice down? Because it's not just, as you know, puppeteering, it's the voice. So someone might, I think that's the biggest thing I notice in the casting I've done for Muppet and non-Muppet stuff is some people are great technically, but they're not really good either at voices. In other words, not good. Like, they don't have a range. They're not Jerry Nelson, but neither was Jim. Jim had 3 voices. He was like, he was this voice or this voice. Or what was the third one? I mean, he said like 3 voices. Oh yeah, Guy Smiley. Like, that was it. That was Jim. There was a newsman who was kind of like this. Dr. Teeth was down here, but it was all like basically 3 voices. Yeah. And then Bill Beretta can do like 5 voices, and Jerry Nelson can do 25 voices. So I think if you're a good technical puppeteer, I think that's what I've noticed. Even had discussions about like, oh, so and so is really good, but they're not great at voices. So if it's a thing where it's being looped by a celebrity, it's a commercial, or then like, great, hire them, because we know they're going to bring a ton of great performance to it. But they might not have a great range of characters, and character can mean not only voice but personalities. Like, some people can just jump in, like Bill Beretta just comes up with these personalities based on people he knows or whatever, and other people. I mean, Dave Goelz. I mean, Bunsen, Honeydew, and God, could you get any more different than Bunsen and Gonzo? And these just pop out of his head. And so I think if you're technically good, I would work on. I don't know. I mean, this is my opinion. It means nothing. What I think impresses and getting jobs for puppet is bringing a character. Now, again, Jim had 8 or 10 characters doing 3 voices. I mean, Ralph the Dog and Dr. Teeth and the Newsman were all shades of the same voice, right? But with a different tone or different attitude. So if you're not great at vocal calisthenics or gymnastics, then get really discreet. It's like an improv bit, like really strong choices in your vocabulary, in your timing. Jack Benny didn't have a funny voice, but he had the way of talking, that laconic hold that's Jack Benny. You just kind of do a Midwestern twang, but you wait, raw chest, so yeah. and that's a character. So you don't have to do, you don't have to be Frank Welker where you do 70 voices. You can do 3, but just so I would say work on your personalities, your characters. And I say that even though you're usually given a script saying, it's a stuffy alligator, it's a an uptight butterfly, but
I want to see that show.
Yeah, exactly. It's my new Odd Couple show. It's a stuffy alligator and I forgot what I said.
Uptight butterfly.
Uptight butterfly. Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but see, I'm showing you I can improv.
It's your podcast. Now do a funny voice.
Come on, Grant, do a funny voice. I'm going to audition you right now. It's a stuffy alligator. Go!
Another day in the swamp. There we go.
There you go, Kelsey Grammer's. No, you nailed it. There you go. You got the job. Now I just got to sell the show.
Well, that's another question I have. Do you pitch things occasionally?
All the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a lunch meeting with someone who's like, do you pitch stuff? Can you help me with my pitch? And I spent an hour explaining, I think, what people want to hear in a pitch or how to frame a pitch. I'm always pitching. I think I've pitched 80 shows and sold 1. I mean, on my own. With the Henson Company, I think I sold 4, Dinosaurs being the first one. Then Aliens in the Family. And we sold a pilot that never got made. It was about 4 cockroaches, 3 cockroaches and a roommate. I forgot what it was called. I think it was called like Pests. And Muppets Tonight. So was involved in all those pitches. And on my own, I've only sold 1 show, pitched 1 million. I sold an animated pilot or an animated series to Fox, and it went to pilot and then never pilot script, and then executives got fired, not over it, but other things. And then typically when you get fired, your shows go with you. So, but yeah, I pitch all the time. In fact, I'm pitching to Netflix now. Yeah, I'm pitching to Apple in a month. Yeah, I'm always trying to, I mean, I've got enough credibility now, or I don't even have an agent. I just call up the people I know because I've known them. The guy, the exec at Apple used to work on Dinosaurs. He was one of our co-producers or associate producer. So I've known him almost 30 years. And he's now running a division at Apple. So I'm like, hey, man, I want to pitch to you guys. Like, okay, well, here's who you pitch to. I'm like, great, thanks.
Yeah.
So, I'm always pitching. And that's a whole nother... But puppets are a hard sell right now. They've always been a hard sell. Nobody's cracked... I said that, no one could sell a primetime animated series. Cartoons were kids. That was it. That was the rule. Kids watch cartoons. Can't do it. You can either do like Fritz the Cat, and it's obviously adult, and it's raunchy, and it's going for the shock value. And then The Simpsons got made. And now suddenly, Fox has 3 shows. And, I mean, people tried to do it for a while. They gave up. But puppets outside of The Muppet Show, which was really a variety show, have never... I mean, Alf was the closest thing to a puppet sitcom. But that was really my favorite Martian with a puppet. It's tough. What's weird is it's really tough to kids shows that are over 5. If you're pitching to 5 and under, the Henson Company has. I mean, even if they're digital puppets like Splash and Bubbles or Sid the Science Kid or Dinosaur Train, they just keep cranking out. I mean, that's where you're accepted, whether it's Pajanimals or something where they're actual physical puppets or digital puppets. But you get over 5 to 7, they're like, no, that's little kid stuff. And that's my personal opinion is because of the success of Sesame Street. It's been just a juggernaut. So puppets are for kids. They teach you the alphabet. They teach you how to be nice to each other. And then all the other shows, Eureka's Castle and Gullah Gullah Island and all these shows that are puppets for kids. So now there's kind of a backlash again with like Nickelodeon and Disney and Cartoon Network probably wouldn't do a puppet show, but Nick and Disney, the other 2 kids' mainstays, they just don't, they say they like puppets, but you can't. I've never seen anyone pitch anything. What was weird was there was a period of time in the 2000s where rappers, like musicians, particularly African American ones, were all developing weird puppet shows. Like it came out of Crank Yankers, I think, because I worked a bit on Crank Yankers. And they wanted to do, one was like the history of rap, and then was just like about, the music scene, but they just, I don't know if it's rappers or that community culturally thinks puppets are hilarious, but they were all spending real money. Kanye West met Kim Kardashian on the set of one of those things, what I've been told, because people who worked on it. I always get mentioned these things, and then it never works out. I don't know why. I'm so urban and in touch with the African American culture. But it's funny, that's a little niche that seems to like puppets. But outside of that, it's a really tough sell. And I don't know why I'm talking like this.
But But that's a good outlet then, wouldn't you say, is like the internet? It's like you can do your own things, right?
Well, yeah, your case in point. Yeah, I think someone will crack it that way. I don't think any network's going to spend, except for the new Muppet Show, which didn't, networks spent a lot of money on that. And I think that's the problem is everyone now with all the big money wants a sure thing. Let's do Mickey Mouse's puppets. Okay. You've got the Muppet Show basically grew out of the S. Sullivan shows and Jim fooling around and doing his weird pilot. I think the internet is the place where you will. It's like Annoying Orange is about as close. It's just a weird thing and it was funny. And there's 2 or 3 of these weird comedy shows that are now picked up, I don't know, by Netflix or something. I guess Annoying Orange was Nickelodeon? Cartoon Network?
Yeah, Cartoon Network. I think one of the 2.
Yeah. And so if you have a puppet idea, and there's tons of them. All my friends are doing something for the internet, whether it's a Kickstarter or just, like you just do your little shows and then you've got something to show. That's the other thing. Because executives, I had executives ask me if dinosaurs was claymation. I'm like, no, it's actually, because I said I'm a live action writer director. Oh, I thought you did animation. I said, well, I can write animation. I can, it's the same thing. They're like, wasn't dinosaurs animated? I'm like, no, it's people in costumes and puppets. Oh, I thought it was like claymation. Like, no. I said, he's like, how big are they? I said, the dad's like 6'6" and his buddy Roy is like 7 feet tall. Really? Like, he was completely blown away. He said, what about the baby? I was like, the baby's the size of like a small bear, like a bear cub. And I was like, really? I had no idea. This is a children's show exec, so I was like, yeah. Look, half of my ideas could be puppet shows, and you just pitch it, and they're like, that's so weird. And I think they immediately go, oh, it's animated. And I'm not going to tell them no. Nowadays, like with this Netflix, the execs there are more open to it because they know my background. So anytime someone meets with me, they're like, yeah, you've got a great puppet idea. But I think you have to work hard. I mean, it'd be interesting. I'm really curious to see, and we'll still date this episode, but how Happy Time Murders is received by the general public. Obviously, it's split the puppet community down the middle. People are like, that's horrible, and that shouldn't be done with puppets because it's a safe zone that children and parents trust. And other people are like, what? Avenue Q, nobody lost their, And I think it's because the trailer was on the internet and anyone could see it.
All right.
Avenue Q, you have to pay money and go, and they're not showing, the internet is for porn on the internet, funnily enough. So I think that's what, I was like, well, Sesame is a trusted thing and people see puppets in Sesame. And I'm like, yeah, but then you're not, caveat emptor. You've got to know what your kid's watching, or at least. So I'm curious. I don't think that'll open up, Crank Anchors was raunchy. It was almost as raunchy as
Happy Time,
yeah. But we'll see. I would love to be involved with a show that, you said, do I pitch? I pitch shows that I think are more like Alf, like puppet or creatures living in our world. Mm-hmm. And it could be ridiculous talking animal ideas or, aliens or something. That's where I pitch. I don't pitch Muppety felt. Also, I feel like that might, be bad blood with the Henson Company or the Disney Muppets at Disney. And I keep my puppet stuff with them. Classic, what you call puppets, but creatures, like, again, Alf, which is technically a puppet, but he was an alien. Mm-hmm. Or, dinosaurs like that. I feel comfortable pitching. Yeah, somebody will crack it. I mean, Alf was, I remember for years, the Henson Company were saying we want to make the new Alf. Like, why aren't we making the new Alf? A sitcom with a creature. And we involved in 2 or 3 pitches that we pitched around. The cockroach one was one we actually sold to NBC. And then they couldn't make a deal with the writers. But someone will do it.
Yeah.
And then I'll say, something clever like that.
Well, as the final question here that I usually ask, you've done so much that we've talked about, and even some we didn't even get to. But what has been the highlight of your career so far?
Oh, God. I think I've had 3. Obviously, Jedi, was amazing. Working on that as your first movie at 19 years old, it was insane. It's funny, people my age are still like, yeah, it's wow. And 19-year-olds are like, that's insane. You were my age. I'm like, yeah. And I was just too in the middle of it to really stand there and go, I shouldn't be here. I'm the luckiest SOB on the planet. So that was a huge highlight. Star Trek 4 was great. I grew up loving Star Trek, and Leonard and I became friends, and we're friends until he passed away. That was amazing. And then Jim Henson. It's sadly all the highlights of my career in the first 10 years. I don't know. It's always, when it's good, it's great. You know, it's being a freelancer, as you well know, as anyone is a puppeteer. I don't know anyone who's a puppeteer has a full-time job maybe for more than 2 or 3 years. When you're working and doing this stuff and making people laugh and having fun with your friends, it's the best feeling in the world. So, I mean, those are 3 obvious milestones, as much for the accolades or the not respect isn't the right word, but the approval it gets from the outside world. Like, you did Jedi, you did Star Trek, you did, you worked on you worked with Jim Henson. But they also were actually amazing moments in my life, where you just kind of like, this is crazy. I mean, my first movie was the biggest movie that had been undertaken at that time, because Gandhi hadn't been shot yet. But, and you're, as they say, you're only as good as your next project. So I've always, it's always like, what's the next thing? And that was Jim Henson too. He never kind of sat back and was like, nothing's ever going to be as great as the Muppet Show. He's always trying to do, what's the next cool thing?
Yeah.
So that's not a invalid question, but it's sort of I think that's probably my short answer. You want the long answer? You got another podcast we can film?
Sure. We'll break it in half. We'll
kidding.
Well, Kirk, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Gary. My personal friend, Greg.
I'm the
Greg Bochoco.
Cantankerous alligator. Or whatever that was.
Yes, Kelsey Grammer from the swamp.
Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks.
My thanks to Kirk Thatcher for taking the time to talk to me here on Under the Puppet. For links to more info about Kurt and to check out some of his work, visit the show notes for this episode number 19, over at underthepuppet.com. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I welcome your feedback via email at hello@SaturdayMorningMedia.com or via Twitter, where the show is at username Under the Puppet. You can also find us at Facebook by searching for Under the Puppet. I want to hear your suggestions for questions I should be asking and for future guests. Also, the goal for this show is to talk to puppeteers making it happen in all sorts of styles of puppetry. So if you know an amazing Boon Raku or shadow puppet artist, please reach out. Let me know who I should be talking to. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you next time right here on Under the Puppet. Music for this episode by Dan Ring, and this episode was edited by Steven Staver. Under the Puppet is a production of Saturday Morning Media and is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who've gone to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up a monthly pledge for as little as $1 a month. Huge thanks to Shay Stewart, Merle Lafferty, Jeff Peterson, Dale Gadania, Steven Staver, Jackie Klimo, Melissa Crawford, Dave Slusher of the Evil Genius Chronicles, Mike Coughlin, Dorothy Pachoco, John D., Kathy Crawford, Brian Greer, Kerry Whitney, Chuck Tomasi from the Technorama Podcast, Chris Foster, Stephen Ing, Clinton of ComedyForecast.com, Vicky DeVries, Mike Wamshaw, Twitter user Butts and Gear, a.k.a. Wildcat, Eve Cunning, Mike Hamilton, Gaston Moreno, Reed Loveland, Ivan Asquith, Vanessa Whitney, Peggy Etra, Kristen Hogan of Squid Friends, David Akers, Zoe Palladino, Ellen Moltari, Christopher Harris, Rachel Jackson of Vox Fabuli Puppets, Carolyn Weisner, John Petty, Rachel Hansen, Darcy Prevost, Fernando Torres, Ron McAdams, Perlicue Magic, Jason Domer, Lee Barrett, Casino Skunk, The Misty Minute, Peter Capesser, Night Gig Studios, Joelle Rechtfertig, Adrian Rose Leonard, Earth to John Francis, RJ, Ginger J. Fitz, Megapodtastic, Paul Brunel, Jamie Hitchcock, Catherine Hannaford, Alan Gratz, Rachel Gibbous, John R. Donald, Jude Major, Miss Maudie and her buddies, and Molly Smith. If you would like to support this show and the other fun content from Saturday Morning Media, become a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly pledge today. You can also tell a friend about the show or leave the show a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Under the Puppet is copyright 2018 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Pachoco, executive producer, all rights reserved. www.SaturdayMorningMedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.